Okay, we are now live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Common Knowledge, a podcast about improving in Magic the Gathering's most affordable format, Pauper. I am your host, Kyle Novus, and I'm joined by my co-host, Manny. How are you doing today, Manny?
I'm doing very well. How are you doing, Kyle?
I am excellent, thank you. So, before
Good.
we get started, I would like to go ahead and thank our sponsor, Legit MTG. If you are looking for singles, please go ahead and check out Legit MTG. They do $2 shipping for all orders throughout the United States, and they have articles written by Magic players just like you. And they're
That
always looking
is,
for new content creators.
that's an awesome value. That's a really good price for shipping.
Oh, absolutely. Especially if you're just looking for those last few cards to complete your deck rather than having to pay through the nose for shipping. Go ahead and visit Legit MTG. Also, we would like to thank our network today. Our podcast is a member of the Constructed Criticism Network. If you're looking for content about limited formats, please check out our sister podcast, Limited Time Only. And if you're looking for information on other constructed formats, please check out our namesake show, Constructed Criticism.
Yeah, great podcast, great guys, very knowledgeable players. They've been playing for years, and I'd say some really talented guys as well.
Oh, absolutely. And Spencer has been great in helping us out with getting this podcast set up. So if you want to thank somebody for all of the technical setup that we have here, go ahead and shoot him a message. Also, I would like to encourage you guys, if you like what you see on this podcast and you want to help support us in one way or another, check out our Patreon page. Just search Common Knowledge and it should come up. If you are looking to donate to the network itself, you can check out the Constructed Criticism Patreon. Anything that you give us helps us to produce more Magic content and helps us to create something that is a higher quality product that contains more information for you.
Indeed.
Okay, so that takes care of all of our little business things. Was there anything else that I missed, Manny?
No, that covers everything. I think we mentioned and thanked everyone we needed to thank.
What now? Sorry, you cut out for a second there.
Oh, no, I said I think we mentioned everybody we needed to mention and thanked everybody we needed to thank.
Okay, thank you so much. So we're going to jump right in, and this week we get to start with our All-Star card of the week. I don't have a lot of experience with this card myself, but Manny, I believe that you're pretty well versed with this one. Would you like to introduce it for us?
Absolutely. So the card we're highlighting this week is, I would say, probably what makes Blue-Red Delver and Mono-Blue Delver partially the powerhouses that they are. So it is Ninja of that. Wait, what? Go ahead. You go ahead.
That's fine. It's Ninja of the Deep Hours. Ninja of the Deep Hours is a 4-drop 3 and a blue creature with, I believe it is a 2/2, and it has ninjutsu for 1 and a blue. And when it deals combat damage to a player, you can draw a card.
Yeah, so it's it's very versatile. It's incredibly sneaky. So it turns your fairy miscreants and your spell stutter sprites into a little bit extra damage and a free card. And the amount of times that you get a free card with this creature is just it's so abundant. It's not an if, it's a when, really.
I think that's really an excellent point, and especially when you calculate in the amount of times that you're bouncing something like Fairy Miscreant or Spell Stutter Sprite, because that turns a lot of your cards into repeatable counter spells and repeatable just draw card.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you're coupling it with something like Augur of Bolas, you're in Value Town. You're getting so much out of it.
Definitely Value Town, USA. So we're going to get a chance to talk a little bit more about how that card fits into the Izzet Delver and the Mono Blue Delver deck in a moment here. So let's not go too crazy talking about it just yet. For this week, we are going to be going over the power rankings of Pauper in order to give everyone an idea of where the metagame is at today. For that, we are using the statistics off of mtgostats.com. From what we can tell, it appears that they use about a week's worth of data to determine exactly the percentage for the metagame of the week. Now,
Right. And
the
I think that's a little bit it's a little bit more up to date than MTGO Goldfish. It kind of lets you see the changes to the meta in real time. What you'll be seeing probably if you hopped on today.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. MTG Goldfish, it lists a lot of those fringe decks that, while they exist and somebody out there is playing them, you aren't really going to see them. But MTGO Stats, it has the most up to date stuff, so you are always going to be finding the major players of that week. So, the first deck that we are going to be looking at is it Delver? And Is It Delver has about 13% of the metagame share and has been popping up throughout Pauper leagues and challenges. I know that, Manny, you've been playing this deck, haven't you?
I have. So I've been playing this deck in Mono Blue Delver as well. But let's stick to Is It. The deck is incredibly good. It's very versatile. I believe, Scred, you're playing snow-covered basics, you're playing islands and mountains, and it makes that such a great removal card. There's been few instances I can think of where Scred doesn't take care of the problem that you're worrying about. Lightning Bolt, as always, is really wonderful. Gush, if you're a very aggressive tempo deck playing, control and early game threats, and Gush just allows you to keep going along with Ninja of the Deep Hours. They're all really great cards, and of course, Delver's Secrets is, an amazing card.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you really hit the nail on the head. The removal suite combined with the draw power is what really makes this deck work. Without that, it would fold quite easily. Most of these decks are running around 7 different removal spells, but you can see as many as 10 being run between Lightning Bolt, Scred, and occasionally Flame Slash.
Yeah, it does bring something to the table, I believe. So I actually prefer to play Mono Blue Delver, but in the mirror when you're playing against Is It Delver, it feels so bad for you. You have maybe 4 Vapor Snags, and they're just grinding you out.
Yeah, and now Is It Delver kind of hits a lot of the decks in the metagame and hits them pretty hard. You're looking at about a 50-50 matchup with most decks, or slightly in favor of Is It Delver based on a player's skill. And I think that's what draws a lot of people to this, is that you're looking at a deck that is going to improve as you improve as a player. So for somebody who's looking to always improve, this is a good deck to always keep in your collection as a benchmark.
Yeah, I agree. I think, playing any kind of league, or if you want to do Pauper Challenge, Blue Red Delver is always going to be a very solid choice. I don't think you could go wrong with it.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right. The only decks that I've really seen that have been able to throw a wrench into the plan of Is It Delver are decks that have recursive or resilient threats. Specifically, Boggles and Stompy are really, really strong choices if you're seeing a meta that is just overloaded with Is It Delver. Boggles specifically because all those creatures that they are playing cannot be targeted by any of the removal that Is It Delver is packing. So the first matchup is pretty much going to go to Boggles 100% of the time, unless they keep a terrible hand and Is It Delver keeps a fantastic hand.
Right, and I mean, and that's something I think you're always going to run into with Boggles. It's just something that's not necessarily specific to Is It Delver, but more to Boggles itself.
Yeah, I think that that's an excellent point. The only other deck that can really fight in the same territory are control decks, really, because they're going to go a little bit bigger than Is It Delver does. So if they can keep Delver under control for long enough, then control decks like Dimmer Alchemy they're just going to go bigger and curve out and win.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Anything else that you wanted to say about Is It Delver?
No, just if you're playing against Is It Delver and you think the ninja is something you don't have to worry about, you're incredibly wrong. Don't underestimate that card. The fact that you can't counter its ability is very huge in control matchups.
Yeah, absolutely. If you see a Fairy Miscreant or a Spell Stutter Sprite, even just an untransformed Delver attacking into you, and they have 2 mana up, uh, you can bet that they're going to be casting a copy of Ninja of the Deep Hours, and that's where the card advantage starts, and that's where you can start to lose the game pretty quickly.
Yeah, that is definitely, in my experience, both playing the deck and playing against it, where you feel the tide starts to turn.
Okay, awesome. So why don't we move on to our next deck? Our next deck that we're going to be talking about this week is Affinity. Now, Affinity, we've seen it in just about every format in Magic the Gathering at this point. Affinity holds 10% of the metagame share. Now, Affinity, have you played this deck at all, Manny? I don't think you have.
I haven't. So I haven't played it and I haven't played against it yet, but it's so funny looking at it because I've been playing Magic for a couple of years, I'd say many years. But it's just so similar to Affinity and Modern. It's a lot of things that you've seen before. It's solid. It's great. Just looking at it on paper, I think it would play very well. But artifact hate, just like Modern Affinity.
Yeah. I've had the opportunity to play this deck a little bit at this point, and while it's definitely strong, I do have to say that weakness to artifact hate is really backbreaking for the deck. And in some ways, I feel that the deck almost operates as a sideboard check to a certain extent.
Exactly like the Modern version. That's so funny.
Exactly like the Modern version. The nice thing is that this version does actually play affinity cards. You're looking at things like Mirror Enforcer and Frogmite.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the whole goal of this deck is to go ahead and dump its hand within the first few turns, typically get a few 4/4 threats out there, 2/2 threats, things like that, and start swinging into the opponent as quickly as possible. Typically, the cards are going to outclass any other aggro deck or creature-based deck, and Counter Magic kind of has an issue with it because it doesn't exactly feel good to be playing a counter spell against something that's not being cast for any mana.
Right, yeah. I'm sure it's looking at this, it looks like you'd probably play Mirror Enforcer by turn 3 without too much trouble.
Yeah, those are really the times when the deck is doing what it wants to do. If the opponent hasn't been interacting with any of the artifacts at that point, then you are typically getting that Mirror Enforcer out there by turn 2 or 3, and it's pretty strong when it works out that way. Post board, you're kind of looking at something that's a little bit different with these decks. Post board, if you are able to side in things that are unconditional removal spells, things like Journey to Nowhere, Victim of Night, even just a simple Doomblade, Affinity can have a hard time dealing with that. And then obviously Artifact Hate, which just about every color has access to, except for black. So this deck can be an issue, but if you have the right sideboard, then you aren't going to have too much of a problem.
Right, yeah. I mean, with how big of a share it has in the meta, I would be surprised, if the majority of people aren't packing at least 1 to 2 cards for it.
That's actually an interesting point that you bring up there, because recently there has been a major fall in Affinity as a deck. During the period of time before the Pauper Challenge was introduced, it seemed like Affinity had most of the metagame share. But now that we're doing these Pauper Challenges, I think that most people have come to the conclusion that they need to be bringing in Affinity Hate. And there was a solid week there where nothing that Wizards was posting had any affinity decks in the um, like top 32 of a Pauper challenge, as well as they were not getting 5-0s in the daily leagues.
And I mean that seems pretty typical for a deck that can be hated out with sideboards so easily. You do tend to see them be cyclical, a lot like I hate to refer to Modern, but it's a little bit what I'm more knowledgeable about with say Tron. You know, you will see rise and falls. You know, just kind of cycles where you know, land destruction will come back in, it'll go back out, people forget about it, then it'll dominate a tournament.
Yeah, I think that is an excellent comparison. Affinity is the deck that if people forget about it, it's going to win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, just looking at the cards it's playing there, they're incredibly powerful. Carapace Forger being, you know, a 4/4 for 2, that's nuts. By the time it's cast, it's already going to be a 4/4. If not that turn, then absolutely the next.
Yeah, it's very rare to see a Carapace Forger cast as a 2/2 in this deck. You almost always see it as a 4/4, and you are never really seeing it cast unless it's going to be turned into a 4/4 that next turn. That's very, very true. So, anything else that you wanted to discuss with Affinity?
No, it just seems like it's incredibly resilient. The fact that, you know, you have access to these colored art or color producing artifact lands seems so great. It seems like you could really, you know, it does seem like it is playing all the colors except black, but that you could easily shift it into another color or take out a color and not lose anything.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because that's what this deck is missing in Modern, is the access to these artifact lands, these colored ones at least. Um, and they can make all the difference in this deck, but they're also kind of the weakest point, uh, which is why most decks that run red, you're seeing Gorilla Shaman in the sideboard, because you're able to blow up an artifact land for 1 mana. And
ooh, ouch. Yeah.
that's a major problem when your entire mana base is artifact lands.
It seems bad. Seems like not something you might be wanting to do when you know that's in your future.
Yeah, definitely seems bad. So that means just if you're going to be going up Affinity, if you think you're going to be going up Affinity, and chances are that if you're playing something competitive, you will be, make sure that you are packing any artifact hate that you can in your color. You are going to need it. So the next deck that we have to discuss here today, and this one I know is probably Manny's favorite right now.
It's
Why don't you
definitely.
introduce it, Manny, since you like it so much?
You bet. So it's Mono Blue Delver. And why, you would ask, I choose to play this over red. Over is it? I just feel like the consistency is there. It feels like I never have any hitches. The only problems may be, you know, starting with 0 to 1 lands or starting with too many. Other than that, the deck is just so geared to run. It's so geared to just, you know, pick it up and start playing. It does reward tight play, skilled play, technical play. I love it. I think it's great. I think you definitely pick up something very cool with Aspire Golems. So it's a 6 colorless to cost, but it has affinity for islands. It's a 2/4 with flying. So, you know, by turn 3, you're able to cast that for 3. And, you know, 2/4 in this format is a pretty big body, not to mention that it has flying, makes it just a really wonderful creature. The downside is you do have, you know, you don't have removal. You have Vapor Snags and you have, let's see, Deprives. Or no, it's Snaps. That's what it is. So you have 2 snaps, 2 vapor snags, or 4 vapor snags. So really what you're trying to do is, you know, you're trying to bounce creatures back to their opponent's hand so you can counter them. You know, if you're too slow, if you stumble and things begin resolving, you're going to have a bad time. But usually this deck is pretty good and pretty solid at running. I think it has a very good matchup with a lot of things. I think its matchup against Is It Delver is not so great, but I'll have to do some more testing with that.
Yeah, I definitely really like this deck. Every single time that I've played against it, the thing that has always impressed me is just how well every single card in the deck works together.
Yeah.
between the Ninja of the Deep Hours, the Fairy Miscreants, Spell Stutter Sprites, even down to things like Brainstorm, which someone might typically bring in against a control or tempo style deck to get some options out of their hand. Um, I will always remember the best use of Brainstorm that I've ever seen, and I've seen it several times since, but dressing an opponent to only have them brainstorm away all of their instants and sorceries is just brutal.
Yeah. That's very funny.
So the good decks that this deck is going to be looking to beat are aggro decks that it can get an aggressive start against, especially if it's on the play. Otherwise, it kind of has to take up that
Mhm.
controlling
Yeah.
stance.
Right. Yeah. If you're not on the play and you are on the draw, you usually, will play the more controlling game until you can resolve a threat and still have enough mana to, vapor snag and counterspell something in return. But, the deck is so counter heavy that it's usually not a problem to one for one people until you can begin to gain a card advantage with Ninja of the Deep Hours and Gush, which in both decks is really a powerhouse. It really, the second you stop, you don't want to see any more lands. You can really start to use them to Gush.
Yeah, absolutely. Which this deck tends to have a pretty low curve. The hardest thing to cast is really that Spire Golem.
Hmm.
So using Gush really isn't that difficult in this deck. It's a pretty easy play, and you get a lot of value out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that Spire Golem, I think the great thing about it is, I kind of put it in a poor light where you're casting it for 3 mana with 3 islands in play, but you're most likely going to be casting it for 2 with 4 islands in play, leaving, a net of 2 still available to, counter spells, spell setter sprite, so many options. It's really great.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, how do you feel about other matchups? Are there any bad
And that's all I
matchups
have to say about
for?
that.
Are there any bad matchups for Mono Blue right now, or is it pretty much
You're,
a
what was that?
50-50? Like, is it? Oh, I'm sorry. I was asking, do you think that there are any bad matchups for Mono Blue Delver, or is it mostly just playing against Is It Delver?
I mean, in my experience so far, it seems like it's the worst. You have the same answers, but they have better ones.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that it is probably one of those 50-50 decks that definitely rewards people for knowing how to play the deck and knowing the metagame, knowing what they have to counter, and knowing what they can let resolve.
Yeah, that's absolutely a big part of it.
Okay, so I believe that the next deck on our list is uh, one that I haven't personally played, and I don't believe that you've
I
played it either,
have.
man. Oh, you
I
have.
played it today. Yeah, I was getting ready. That was when I was messaging you earlier. I was getting ready for today's podcast.
Okay. So why don't you start us off with this one then, since you're at least a little versed with it?
Yes. Okay. So the next deck on the list is Stompy. It is very cool. You're playing a lot of very cheap creatures that become bigger. So you're playing stuff like cheap value creatures that become bigger. So Nettle Sentinel, Quirion Ranger to untap that Nettle Sentinel, Skargan Pit Skulk, which is a really cool card. It's got Bloodthirst 1. It's a pay 1 for 1/1, so it becomes a 2/2 if you've dealt any damage to it. Young Wolf, 1 for a 1/1 with Undying. Burning Tree Emissary for those awesome hands, BTE, 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 uh, you know, Skargan Pit Skulk. Super cool. Nest Invader gives you free tokens to play just more spells, more spells, more spells, more spells. And then you're also playing Rancor. I think that's really the backbone of this deck. Just it is so brutal to have every creature be +2, +0 larger, no matter, when it dies. It really drives the deck. It drives it hard. A very powerful card.
Yeah, I think that Rancor really is the backbone of this deck too. Outside of just fielding a lot of creatures very, very quickly and building up that imposing board, Rancor turns any threat that they have into just that must answer threat at the moment. And
Right.
because Rancor is just constantly being recurred, you are constantly looking at a must answer threats just about every turn. And
Yeah.
that's pretty demanding of just about any deck out there right now.
Oh, definitely. I mean, when all of your, no, I'm not gonna say all, but when many of your one drops become, 4 2s or 4 1s, it's pretty impressive, and it demoralizes your opponent for sure.
Yeah, it makes it very difficult to play that grindy matchup or to even play a creature to creature matchup. You're kind of looking for board wipes and ways to get around their creatures. And it's hard to be faster than Stompy because of that.
Yes.
That's really why it's able to sit at the place in the meta that it is right now.
Right, yeah. Burning Tree Emissary and Nest Invader just give you so much gas to keep going. They're really great cards. They really just help with those explosive bursts of aggressive speed. It's an awesome deck. I think Vines of Vastwood gives you, well, Vines of Vastwood and Hunger of the Howlpack. They both give you just enough of an edge to really be able to, make your opponent block incorrectly, attack incorrectly, because they don't know what kind of tricks you have. They don't know what you're really capable of at any moment if you have 1 or 2 cards in hand because of those.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Vines of Vastwood makes removal almost seem bad at times, but you absolutely need it against this deck. Um, Good matchups for this deck are really the ones where your opponent isn't going to have removal or be able to, or decks where they're attempting to play a fair creature game with you, because nothing's
Right.
going to be able to beat a fair creature game uh, if they're
Yeah,
playing
and
against Stompy.
And it seemed very much like decks that were trying to play 1 for 1 with me. It wasn't, it wasn't happening because I could do what I was wanting to do a little bit faster. And Rancor made, anything, even my 0/1 Eldrazi tokens, Rancor made them a threat. It made them a game that they had to play with me.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point because I've lost way more games against Stompy to those little Eldrazi spawn tokens than I would really like to admit. Um,
Mhm.
they are extremely powerful and they can be a threat just like everything else in the deck if the situation arises.
Mhm. And one thing I noticed kind of playing this deck was that Hooting Mandrills wasn't in it. And I thought that was very strange, considering that you're not using anything in your graveyard other than Rancor. So I threw one of those in today, and it really paid dividends for what that's worth.
Okay, that's interesting. I haven't seen anybody playing Hooting Mandrills, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't have a place, even if it's just as a one of.
Right? Yeah. I mean, it could just be that I'm smarter than everyone on Earth. That might be it as well. I don't know.
It could be. You never really know. The best thing you can be doing if you're playing against Stompy is playing a matchup that needs to be interacted with. Something just like our next deck is actually really hard for Stompy to play against. And that deck is it Blitz, which currently has about 5% of the meta. And I know when Manny and I were just jamming some games the other day, he was playing Is It Blitz and pretty effectively too. It's a strong deck.
Yeah, the deck is, it's a combo deck. It's very intuitive. It practically outlines the path to victory for you almost. And I mean, beyond knowing when to play spells, when to hold them, when to fold them, it's very simple and very powerful and very fast.
Yeah, and I think it excels against decks like Stompy that don't have a lot of ways to interact with their opponent because your creatures, you play less than Stompy does, and they are just so must answer, even more so than what Stompy has going for it. If somebody doesn't have an answer to a Kiln Fiend or a Nivix Cyclops, they're as good as dead.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. You know, the when we were playing games, a Kiln Fiend becoming, a 15 power creature was so fast. It would happen so rapidly. Just really great blazing fast combo deck.
Yeah, absolutely. The best thing that you could be doing if you're playing against something like Is It Blitz is packing a lot of creature removal. And if you don't have access to creature removal, at least having some way of interacting with the spells that your opponent is casting. Um, you have to make sure that you're stopping things like Team or Battle Rage.
Right. And I think a little, going a little deeper into that, I think the strategy you really want to adopt with a deck like Is It Blitz is the same kind of strategy you want to adopt when you're playing against Bant Heroic, when you're playing against Infect, Boggles. Is they don't have very many creatures, and that's the key. That's where it all starts. Make sure you pack enough removal, and whatever removal you do have, don't try to get greedy. Don't try to 2-for-1 them. Just get rid of it.
Hmm. Absolutely. Once you see it, you have to get rid of it. That becomes your priority. Um, because if you take a turn to tap out and advance your game plan, that is the turn that Is It Blitz will kill you.
Absolutely, yeah, out of nowhere.
Hmm. And if they have, I would say, if they have anywhere from 3 to 4 cards in their hand, that can be enough to do it.
It can, yeah, it absolutely can be. Teamer Battle Rage is a heck of a card.
Okay. Anything else that you wanted to say about any of our power ranked cards here today? Not
Out
cards,
of
any
the cards or
decks.
the decks? Oh, the decks. No. I think we've covered them really well. I think in the following weeks, we're gonna go through a lot more deck to deck interactions. A lot of the cards, because a lot of these cards are so good, they're seeing played in many decks. A lot of the interactions between them and how to optimize play with them.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a good point. We will be going into depth with a lot of these decks and a lot of these cards uh, in the next few weeks. This is just kind of to give us an idea of where the metagame is at right now. I think that we're going to be doing these power rankings about once a month just to give us an idea of where things are at that point in the metagame.
Yeah,
So,
I think. Yeah, and that'll be great to be able to touch base, see what everyone's doing, and then plan proactively.
exactly, that's a good point. Our goal here is really to stay up to date on this metagame so that we can give you the most necessary information possible at any point in time. So, the next segment that we have is something that um, I think Manny and I found a really good one for. And this segment is Pauper to Prince, where we talk about our favorite rising star in the format and a deck that, while it definitely isn't in the top 5 in the metagame, it looks really, really good right now.
Good and fun.
Good and fun. So, the deck that we're talking about today is, and it doesn't really have a name. Most websites I've seen just have it with the Sultai color label of UBG.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go ahead and call it Sultai Land Destruction. And Sultai Land Destruction, I saw it a few days ago, 5-0, a daily league. And then it happened again like a day or two later. And this deck takes advantage of land destruction cards in the green and blue color spectrum, as well as bounce effects for permanents.
Right. And as you mentioned earlier, in this format, our land count is so low that losing lands is it's very painful. It's very distracting. It throws you off your game plan, and you can't advance your game plan any longer.
I think that's an excellent point, especially when you're looking at decks like Is It Delver you mentioned before. It's only running about 12 colored lands, and the rest of it are fetches like Ash Barrens and Evolving Wilds. So if you go ahead and get rid of their colored lands, it's pretty hard to draw into new ones for those decks. And
Yeah.
I think that's why it's doing so well right now.
I agree, and that's kind of another thing to move for a moment. One of the reasons I do like Mono Blue Delver so much is you're not fetching, you're not at the mercy of any kind of shenanigans like that.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Given this deck, I think the decks that it's really looking to see right now are Is It Delver, Affinity to a certain extent, and Tron.
Yeah, Yeah, definitely. I think I mean, not having played it, I would think the Tron matchup is very, very bad.
I haven't played the Tron matchup, but I have had the pleasure of playing this deck for a few games, and it is just brutal. The best turn one play that I've seen is Sakura Tribe Scout. If you can get that out there and get to 3 lands untapped on turn two, what you end up having is the ability to cast Thermokarst. And if you cast Thermokarst, which is the green, that's right, green, destroy target land. If that land was a snow land, you gain 1 life. If you can cast,
Just to add just a little to the burn.
oh, it's a definite insult to injury, especially if you're playing against Izzet Delver, which is trying to take advantage of Skred. Uh, Casting that on turn two is bad enough. If you are on the play, keeping your opponent at 1 to 2 lands for the entire game is really a possibility with this deck.
Yeah, and I mean, so Thermokarst, we didn't describe that. It's 2 green and a colorless sorcery, exactly as Kyle described. So that, yeah, is just so damaging. It's so good. And I mean, the other part of where this deck excels is its value. So it's playing so many value-oriented creatures that do other things that you're going to be able to bounce back or play again. It's similar to the way ours or Ninja of the Deep Hours bounces value creatures back again.
Yeah, these cards are all kind of things that you wouldn't mind using Ghostly Flicker on, which it does have one of in the deck. But the cards, just to give you an idea, you're looking at running Sakura Tribe Scout, Coiling Oracle, Sylvan Ranger, Mold Shambler, Pneumatic Wall, Mold Drifter, and Dinroga Horror. All of those are absolute nightmares in terms of destroying permanents you don't want to see, creating card advantage for yourself, and bouncing back permanents to your opponent's hand or fetching lands.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, you're doing so many things, and it's such a great strategy.
Yeah, the only issue that I've been seeing with it is you really need to get in every piece of damage that you can, because until you land a Dinroba Horror, it's pretty hard to win. Um, People do tend to concede pretty quickly they once they no longer have any lands. People tend to just say, "Okay, let's go to the next game." But
I
I wouldn't be too fast to skip out of the game if I were playing against this, even though it really hurts and it's painful to watch happen. Um, I've played this and it kind of it's a hard thing to actually close the game out. You end up having to take your opponent out with 1 to 2 damage to the face per turn. So if you think that you could swing the win and it's just a question of time rather than resources, then I would definitely stick around in a matchup against this. So, other than that, in this deck, its sideboard it still looks pretty solid. It's running 4 natural states for the most part. 3 Dispels, 2 Hydroblast, 3 Pulse of Marasa, and 3 Penumbra Spider. So all of these cards are pretty standard sideboard cards or main deck cards throughout the format, and they really hit the entire cross section of the format, especially when you're looking at so much main board land destruction.
Yeah, I mean, you know, if you think your opponent's going to be playing lands, it's probably a safe bet that you'll have targets.
And I'm pretty sure most of your opponents are going to be playing lands. So I think this is a good choice if you are going to be looking at a new deck to check out, an interesting brew, or if you're looking at something to maybe optimize for your next league or the next Pauper challenge, this is definitely something that is worth the look.
Yeah,
Now,
absolutely.
go ahead.
Oh no, that was it. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. We got all of that then. So, if you are playing against this deck, uh, the best thing that you're going to need to do is have counter spells. I think that the mono blue Delver deck is really a good example of a deck that would do well against this because it has access to so many lands. And if you can counter those Thermokarsts and Mulvani Acid Mosses, then you're in pretty good shape. So having things, having counter spells in your deck is really what's going to save you in this matchup.
Yes, as long as they don't Sakura Tribe Scout turn 1 on the play.
Yeah, if they do that, then it's pretty much good night. Okay, so now that we've covered our Sultai land destruction deck, we have one last section for ourselves to go over today, and that is our what we are playing and why. So I know, Manny, you've been playing Is It Delver and Mono Blue Delver quite a bit. Why have you chosen those specific options, other than Spencer giving you some access to those decks?
So those decks are something I'm very familiar with. They're more my style of play. They're more my speed of play. I also like combo decks a lot, like that Is It like that other Is It deck. But just you know, a tempo deck is, I'm not going to say easy to play, but it's familiar. You know, do your best to control the game, land your early threats, just dominate it. You know, make your opponent not want to play Magic for a couple days.
I think it's a good deck to be starting out in a format with, like we were talking about earlier with, I believe it was Is It Delver. It's a deck that rewards you for knowing the metagame, and you can definitely see your improvements in the deck the more that you play with it. So the more that you learn the metagame here, the better your results with a Delver deck in this format is going to be.
Yeah.
So having those immediate results, that's really encouraging, especially if you're just getting into this format. It rewards you for learning what card do I counter when I'm playing Affinity, what card can't I see when I'm playing Tron, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they're great decks. I'll probably stay with them for a little while, but you know, for the interest of good content, I'm probably not going to play Stompy more. I don't know how much more you can say about that. It's a great deck. It is very linear. It doesn't seem like what I would consider the most, what I would play to have the most fun. I'll probably switch to that Is It combo deck, or possibly this Sultai land destruction deck. That looks like a great way to make people miserable.
And when your opponents are miserable, of course, that means that chances are you are winning. So
Yeah.
that's always a good side effect.
Indeed.
So
I think I'm a. Oh, sorry. I was going to say I'm a firm believer in that just however much fun my opponent isn't having, I'm inversely having that much fun.
I think that's a popular sentiment amongst most Magic players.
Good.
So the deck that I've been playing lately, and Manny has had the misfortune of learning to play this format against it for the most part, is the Inside Out combo deck. And the Inside Out combo deck is, for those of you who don't know, because I do see a lot of people that I end up playing against saying, like, oh, that's a really cool deck. Where did you find that? Is this a homebrew? And it's really a fairly popular deck right now. There are a few individuals that are using it to great effect. The goal of the Inside Out combo is casting Tireless Tribe, which is a 1-drop, 1/1 creature, and it's 1 white mana to cast it. And it gets +0/+4 for every card that you discard. So, and that's just something you can do at any point. You can just discard a card, and it becomes a 1/5. So, what you do is you tack on a card called Inside Out, which is 1, and it's a hybrid mana then, which is blue or red. For an instant, switch target creature's power and toughness until end of turn. So the whole idea.
And
Oh,
and you draw a card.
And you draw.
It's even better than
that is actually
what you described.
That is actually an important point of it because you do need the cards in your hand to discard them. You combine it with other cantrips like Shadow Rift, which gives your creature shadow, and go ahead, swing in, and switch the power and toughness, discard your hand, hit your opponent for like 21 damage.
Yeah, it definitely happened to me more than once.
Now, the reason that I'm playing this deck is, even though it sounds like a very, very fragile combo, there are a lot of pieces that can help protect it. And the more that I play it, the more that it feels like the combo is more skill-based than it is luck-based.
Mm-hmm.
And you're able to play around a lot of what your opponent is doing. You can beat control decks pretty easily if you know exactly what cards you need to be casting and in what order. So it's one of those decks that if you take the time to learn it, it's extremely good.
Yeah, I've got some input for that as well. So, having played against it, one of the very first, probably the first Pauper game I've ever played was against it. And, being unfamiliar with it is just disastrous. Even if you don't plan on playing it ever, it's something you should definitely look into so you know how to play against, because it will, the same as the Is It combo deck, will come out of left field. You'll get hit for 21 and not know how it happened. I think our first or second game, you were maybe between 2 and 5 life with lethal on board, and you came out and got me, and I didn't understand what happened.
Yeah, I I remember that happening, and I think it was a good introduction to Pauper, simply because it is a strong format, and to think that crazy things like that can't happen is just wrong.
It's like
crazy decks like that are going to come out of left field.
Yeah, it made me feel like that Jeff Goldblum quote from Jurassic Park: "Life finds a way." Coming into Pauper, I didn't think the power level would be, that perfect. I actually, now having been playing for a couple weeks, think it's probably I think it's the healthiest format of Magic I have ever played. It is phenomenal. It's excellent. It's wonderful. I love it. I want to keep playing Pauper. I think it's great.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. It is an extremely healthy format, and it is so much fun to play. So we've kind of hit on what we're playing and why. The only other deck that I do want to mention is a homebrew that I've been working on right now called Esper Zombies. So Esper Zombies, it is a tempo take on zombies, believe it or not. I'm not going to go too in-depth with it because we'll probably post some information about it on our Facebook page or in our Patreon.
Cool. You should send me that list. I would like to play that. That would be fun.
I think you'll really like it. You'll find it very, very interesting.
Good.
So that wraps up most of the content that we have for today. Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about today, Manny?
Nope. I've got nothing. I've got Game of Thrones starts in like an hour. I've got to get ready for that.
Okay, so you have to go ahead, get all your food, and just strap in.
Well, and blankets, and I have to make sure the lighting is just right, and I have to make sure that I make my baby tired so he'll fall asleep.
I really like to picture you spending the next hour adjusting the lighting in your living room.
Stranger things have happened.
Okay, so as we wrap things up, are there any shout-outs that you have for this episode?
Yes, shout out to you, number one, for bearing with me and helping me get into the Pauper format and learn and, destroy me with despicable combos. Shout out to my friend Roger, who I met doing constructive criticism. He's a great guy. And a shout out to Spencer for making this all happen.
Well, I'm glad that I could introduce you to this format. I would also like to send a shout out to our friend Spencer at Constructive Criticism. He has been absolutely great in getting this whole podcast put together. And this is the first podcast that I've ever done. And he has been so phenomenal in helping me learn the ropes and bearing with me, especially when my computer did not want to do what it was supposed to do.
Oh yeah. I think in the 5 minutes before I left the conversation, he said the F word more times than I think I've heard anybody say it in like those 300 seconds.
It was interesting. I started feeling bad about how awful my computer was, but he was very, very gracious, and he assured me that it was fine, and he kept thanking me for doing what I was doing. And that really means a lot. But also, I would like to have a shout out to Manny because you are someone who volunteered to co-host this show, even though you did not know the format when no one else wanted to co-host it, and that means the world to me.
Well, you are welcome.
And last but not least, I want to give a shout out to my friend Zach. My friend Zach, he's been going through a hard time right now at home with his family, some illness issues with his mother, but he's been really trucking along, and he's always an inspiration and kind of lets me know that every day I can become a better person the same way that he has. So,
very cool.
If I was looking to get in touch with you, Manny, as a viewer or listener, where could I find you?
Well, don't, because you won't find me.
Okay.
No, you can't. You can find me on Facebook. My actual name is Manuel, Manuel, Mraz on Facebook. You can find me on Twitter. I believe I'm Rain_Manny on there. And those are probably the places that I'm going to talk to you.
Okay, awesome. If you are looking for me, you can also find me on Facebook, Kyle Novis, Novis. It is pronounced Novus, not novice.
Oh, that's such a good burn. I'm going to use that.
You would not be the first, and I'm sure that you will not be the last. So, otherwise, if you're looking for me, I do not use the Twitters. You can find me in the Common Knowledge Facebook page, in the Constructive Criticism Facebook group, or you can find me on Twitch with my screen name, which is Cursed Lono, which we will either put in the notes beneath this or somewhere on our Constructive Criticism bio page. So, that wraps things up for this week. Thank you so much, everyone, for taking time out of your day to listen or watch this. It means the world to us. If you get the opportunity, please subscribe to this podcast. It should probably end up on iTunes at some point. I'm absolutely certain that Spencer is going to make a point of doing that. When you subscribe, it really does a lot for us. It helps us out. Or just keep checking us out on legitmtg.com because it should be posted there, and it should also be posted on the Constructive Criticism website. Did I miss anything?
Nope.
Okay, awesome. And so I do have here to insert a catchy sign-off phrase. I'm certainly working on that one. So until then, I hope you guys enjoyed playing Pauper, and remember, it's not about the cost of your deck. It is about the way that you play it.